Thanks for joining us, folks. This is a very anticipated panel that we've got this afternoon. So I would love to introduce our industry experts. We have Karen Halligan, partner, KPMG. Please give him a round of applause. Steve Weaver, Head of Research, Think TV. We have John Hawkins, Chief Scientist, Playground XYZ, and also Matt Daniel, Head of Research for Amplified Intelligence. Thank you. All right. So to kick off, as Gay alluded, as various methodologies and metrics for ad attention have emerged and significant industry debate around its merits has played out, the IAB, Ad Effectiveness Council, great one at that, recently launched the Ad Attention Measurement Landscape Report. The report, which is the largest collation of information and perspectives on ad attention measurement available in the Australian marketplace. It cuts through the hype to provide balanced information on emerging techniques for measuring advertising attention. The report found that developments in the attention economy are providing marketers with additional insights into their advertising investments, but too much focus is being placed on the ad attention metrics in isolation. The report outlines that while attention measurement is an important input to understanding advertising impact, it's not yet ready to be treated as an industry standard currency. So today we have gathered our industry experts here to discuss the role and benefits of ad attention measurement. I might come and sit down. This is on? Yep, great. Look, I thought we'd warm up the panel first with a quick fire round. You all know who I work for, so I love a bit of TV, and we might start with the TV guy himself. So, Steve, what's capturing your attention on the biggest screen in the living room at the moment?
What a great question. Let me just run. I had to write them all down. Shandaram on Apple Plus, Alone on SBS, Serpent Queen on Stan, The Block, of course, on Channel 9, The Watcher on Netflix, 100 on 10 Play, American Pickers on 7 Mate, and the EPL on Optus Sport. Gee, TV is evolving.
That's impressive. Matt, how do you want to back that up?
I didn't have one for every network. I've been watching Mr. In Between. It's a fantastic show on Binge. 25-minute episodes, 3 seasons, written for 3 seasons. Absolutely fantastic. It's about a hitman in Australia. Really recommend.
Awesome. What about you, John?
Awesome. This is on. Great. I've got a couple of obsessions. Long-running obsession with The Marvellous Mrs. Maisel. If no one's seen that, it's just... Actually, I feel like most of my media viewing is the time between waiting for the next season of The Marvellous Mrs. Maisel. It's fantastic. It's like a counterpunch to Mad Men, which I also like, but it's punchier, it's nicer, it's really worthwhile. The other thing is Bluey. Which for the non-parents in the room, like it's a kind of it's a double-edged sword. It used to make me feel like a bad parent, but I've learnt to sort of view it as aspirational.
Excellent. So not Peppa Pig then. Okay. Kaz, what about you?
So unlike Steve, I might be getting out a little bit more than yourself, actually, Steve, or I'm not aligned to television networks. I have 3 teenage daughters, so we are watching Friends repeats like there is no tomorrow. Like it is literally, and my 17-year-old can quote it verbatim. If I'm choosing for myself at the moment, I'm a bit of a crime watcher, so I'm watching Mr. Mercedes has been the last thing that I've been binge watching, but I must confess I don't watch a lot of free TV anymore. I pick what I want when I want, and most of our family is off streaming services.
Yeah, I think we're watching on telly on our terms at the moment, aren't we? Or that's where we're moving. Okay, let's get down to the business end. Are we ready? I'm going to throw this to John and Matt first. So the IAB believes that ad attention metrics are not yet ready to be treated as an industry standard currency. Have they got it right? Do you agree or disagree? I'll pass over to you folks.
I'll go. Yeah, sure. So the squeamishness about going full to saying it's a global currency is kind of understandable. We know attention's complicated. It's a complicated brain process involving different kinds of stimuli. We've already heard people today talking about how difficult it was to get viewability into a standard, and that's something that's fairly obvious, and it's only dealing with one sense. So it kind of makes sense that it's going to be difficult to come up with a single metric that deals with how we process auditory and visual signals and then gets us right to that moment before we form those memory structures that we're all chasing. But in spite of that, it doesn't mean that we can't come up with effective local currencies. So if you think in things in terms of like large amounts of advertising is visual, particularly in a digital world where you've got like fairly reused formats, even with slight variations, new platforms, new apps, and a real need for marketers to be able to sort of differentiate between them and find where the value is. There seems to be a real good opportunity to have a visual attention metric that can be a local currency for marketers to differentiate between all of these different offerings.
No, I agree with that. I think at the moment, it's definitely not ready for a currency. We're debating currently, between me and Playground XYZ and everyone else, that what attention metrics are we using globally? There's areas where we'll get it right and there's areas where we'll get it wrong. Right now, we're thinking about attention as a planning and buying signal. While it's not perfect at the moment, it's a really good indicator for how your campaign is doing in benchmarking against how people are actually viewing advertising. Also, it can be used in a variety of different ways, and we're all learning about that space as we go along. I think it's reminiscent of kind of the viewability days, where it kind of expanded out quickly, and then we found out a few years down the track how viewability will be used. I think the same thing's going to happen in attention. It'll just take a different time frame.
Yeah, it's interesting perspectives that you say that there's local currencies, which can mean many things, trading, measurement. I'm going to flip it and sort of point it from a client and publisher perspective. So, Karen and Matthew, I should say, what are your clients talking about or using attention metrics, and do you think it has a place in measuring advertising performance? So, Karen, what are they saying over at your side?
So I work a lot with chief marketing officers and boards, and I would say that if we think that they are talking about attention metrics, we're kidding ourselves. That's not the conversation that I'm having with marketing teams. They're very different conversations. The conversations I'm having are around operating model. Have I got the right technology in place? Am I getting sales, footfall, traffic, transactions that I need to grow my business? Am I optimising my investments? And I think that they empower and enable their agency partners to take that responsibility in, and I think that's kind of what they're paying for. They're saying to anyone who's managing their money, you guys need to make sure that if I'm spending money, I'm spending it in areas that's effective. But I'm not going to have a conversation around that with a board member or a marketing, like a CMO, at all, because the conversations that I'm having are quite different. It doesn't mean that attention metrics aren't important in the scale of if I had to choose between one platform and another, and there were people spending more time with one, that's a great choice. But I would say that they're not getting down to that level of detail, and if we think we're going to table it as a currency, we're kidding ourselves for that to be the case.
Yeah, okay, so pretty firm perspective from your side. What about you, Matt?
I think Karen, is right, as in we have very different discussions with brands as opposed to publishers, as opposed to advertisers. Brands, when they look at it, they see our data and they see it's a complete shift in how they think about how they're going to use each platform and each channel. If we talk about advertisers, they want to make sure they're buying the right placements at the right areas with how they think the platforms work. And how publishers are looking in is they don't want to be surprised. They want to see how they can work with attention metrics and how they can, they're not going to be surprised by an agency conversation or a brand conversation. They're all very different levels of conversations. They all have different levels about what it means for them. For a brand, they want to make sure that their ad is being seen at the moments they care about being seen. For an agency, they want to make sure that they're buying attention that makes sense for what they're trying to achieve. And for a publisher, they want to make sure they're fairly represented in attention and making sure that all the assets they're using and all the assets they plan to use are actually going to be accepted by the attention industry. So it's horses for courses.
Yeah, that's great. I think I like the way that you mentioned. I suppose it's a good segue into sort of talking about the publishers. So Steve, and we'll start with Steve and John, but Steve first. Do you think the industry could align and agree on attention measurements or metrics as a principle? And how ready or how far are we from having agreed methodologies that will turn attention into effective metric and currency? What are you seeing on your side?
Well, I know the ARF in the US is actively working on a standard as we speak. So there's certainly some intent globally to get a standard. But I think discussing it or championing it as a metric per se is probably not the right space to be. It's a fantastic guiding principle. Ultimately, we're trying to quickly establish a link between ad exposure and a business or a brand outcome. So, you know, we love attribution or market mix modelling, or, you know, looking at our sales data move when we're spending money on advertising. Ultimately, we need to make these decisions faster. So if attention is a way of helping explain the variance a little faster and a little quicker, then I think we're a step in the right direction. So yeah, I think we can align on it. I'll be interested to see what the CRA says on Friday with regards to their approaches to around audio, but certainly it's a concept that can have a standardisation.
I think it's really interesting. You mentioned the word variance there. We were having a chat about this previously with regards to where creative plays. Do you think that creative plays a role in sort of the variance of the results?
Without a doubt. I mean, whether it's Paul's data or, you know, any market mix model, Kantar's data, it's all going to tell you it's, you know, 50% plus in terms of creative. There's no doubt about that, but no one's really cracked yet the creative code. Keep going, Kantar. Be interesting to, you know, the world will explode when someone finally does. But until then, we know that creative plays a large role, as does media. So, you know, I work in and around media for a very long time, and so we're constantly trying to find and explain the variance that the platforms contribute themselves.
Yeah, true. John, anything in addition to that in terms of what Steve was talking about, the challenges and...
Yeah, sort of the likelihood of coming together with creating a single metric, a unified metric. Yeah, so I think it, sort of continuing on from what we were talking about before, globally it seems hard to imagine, but maybe locally with something like, say, visual attention, it seems, you know, more likely. But I think we should probably... It's probably too early on in the kind of innovation cycle at the moment. We're still learning a lot about this space. And if we take the kind of criticism that Karen's just raised seriously, we probably want to get to the point where the brands have got a little bit more interest in it. They've got a sense of what works and when attention doesn't work, so that if we do start talking about standardisation, they're involved in that process. It's not just us doing sort of navel gazing and coming up with what we think is the right way to measure this stuff. So I think even some guidelines more around how we go about running experiments. I mean, not everyone is as sophisticated as Canva, unfortunately. So we you know, just helping brands run sort of comparative tests, seeing what works for in different verticals, different kinds of campaigns. I think that would be probably more useful than coming up with a standard at the moment.
Sure.
Can I just jump in there? Yeah. I think that the point that I guess that I was sort of alluding to before is connected to this. But you know, we need the C-suite, so CFO and CEO, to see marketing as an investment and not a cost. And I think that when we get too caught up into too many granular details of new metrics that are different to other things that people are used to, we do ourselves a bit of a disservice because we get further and further away from what the C-suite are looking for, which is an outcome. You know, is my business growing? How is that actually being done? And what's the connection point to that? So without a logical end-to-end connection all the way through the value chain to attention, right back up that goes to a transaction or a sale, if you take language like that into there, it becomes one of those buzzwords. And I think as an industry, and I have, for those that have not met me, I've worked in client, in agency, in publisher, and now as a consultant. You know, I've been in that, caught up in all of the buzzword terminology, but it does our industry a bit of a disservice. So if we're going to go in and start talking about attention metrics as a way to justify premiums, and if I was a publisher, I would go down that path, right? Like, that's absolutely what I'd be looking to do. How do I extract yield out of my inventory through putting premiums against these things? But if I'm a client on the other side of that, I need to know that if I'm going to be asked to pay more, if it's going to be worth more, and I need to be able to make choices off the back of that, that there's going to be a tangible outcome for my business as a result. And I think that's where we get a bit too caught up in terminology that sits in the industry between publisher and agencies, and not really connecting it all the way through to what a client's looking for.
And Karen, I'm just throwing one out there too. I mean, talking about sort of buzzword bingo and so forth. Is it quite challenging for clients to, at the brand level, to actually have an understanding of all the metrics that are around, even metrics that have been around for quite a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say for those that spend times with media plans, and I imagine there's quite a few of you, you have a master plan and an overview, and then some clients will go beyond that and have a look at what's sitting at the sub-level. But you could have a media plan with 15 tabs with 4,000 rows in digital. And I've seen some of these really complex plans and had to actually sat recently with a CEO to get him to sign off on a budget. And he wanted to understand the level of detail. And these plans are complex, right? And it's been a few years since I've been in an agency, and I had to sit with the detail before I walked into that room. And I've worked in this field my whole life, So I think that it is really hard for people to know and understand the detail that sits in our industry as it's become more complex, and to feel confident to admit what they do and don't know, which I think that not everyone always is happy or able to do. Yeah. So it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. John, you're doing some interesting things in the optimisation space too, that are going beyond planning. Did you want to sort of elaborate a little bit further and what you're seeing in the market with regards to support, outcomes?
Yeah, so we see it like in sort of multiple different levels. So there's a paper we like to lean on that talks about, there's sort of discussion about what attention is and how attention and sort of media and advertising interact from an attention perspective. And they draw a discrimination between what they call transfer and priming. So the idea of transfer is that you can have structural elements in the media that naturally lend themselves to sort of transferring attention onto the ad. So you can think of that as a sort of reduced ad clutter, positioning of the ad. There's a bunch, those are the kind of obvious things. There's probably a whole bunch of more subtle things, but these are structural things that basically lend ads in that environment to get more attention. And the beauty of being able to sort of measure and identify that is that gives you sort of a way to optimize campaigns from the outset without having to do that kind of initial learn component. Of course, that's going to kind of, that'll end up lending a certain sort of level of premium to those inventory because everyone's going to be chasing it. So that kind of leads into the notion of priming, and that is where there will be contextual elements in the media which sort of lend to the drawing of more attention to given ads when you get that kind of synergy, to use another buzzword that's been overused already, between the advertising and the context. So we see that being able to, we're doing a lot of work trying to understand how the creative resonates within the context to sort of initiate that priming effect, and we're seeing that we can also use that in an optimization process. So we can actually learn a little bit about what contexts the creative is resonating in, and then exploit that for the remainder of the campaign. So that's kind of the two prongs of our optimization process, exploiting the transfer and exploiting the priming.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll pass over to Matt now too, and Steve. So we've heard a little bit about the optimization piece and I suppose not the disconnect, but how far we have to go from a brand perspective. Where do you see the opportunity for ad attention, let's call it measurement, and can it go beyond the concept of just an insight into aiding, planning decisions, and can it go into creative execution and sales attribution? What about from your side of the fence? Let's start with you, Matt.
Yeah, the way we think about it is we've chosen the words of long-term and short-term. How much attention is required to start building those long-term associations that you want? How much time is required to refresh those associations you want? We landed on the language of short and long, but it did start as build and refresh. How brands are using it? I lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me.
That's all right. I'll throw it over to Steve. We talked a little bit about creatives there, but is there anything else? Do you see it being a part of sales attribution eventually, or do you see it aiding that media planning decisions from a publisher perspective?
I think analytic and planning is where it lives, not so much in the final trade per se, but certainly in the planning process. And then to John's point, I think market would dictate price based on the demand of that inventory, as opposed to trying to layer a premium on it in the first place. But putting that aside, it's a good planning tool from a creative perspective, because firstly, your platform has to generate a level of attention or engagement, insert buzzword. Secondly, if the creative is more contextually relevant to someone, it theoretically has a higher level of attention compared to someone that it's not contextually relevant to. But overall, it's going to have a score. So if that score, irrespective of how it's measured, is higher than somewhere else, as a planning tool, it's a good way to guide whether it's going to generate the levels of sales return or business return that you would expect. You can model that, and smarter people than me are already doing it, and there's companies, of course, that are trying to commercialise that. But it's absolutely the sweet spot in the analytics space, and to get caught up in it calling a metric, I think is probably not the right space to focus.
Great.
Just adding to that, with creative, Steve's absolutely right that the platform dictates how much attention an ad is likely to get. We know the mediating factors of how attention works, and we know that a creative is one of the last ones to be able to push attention up or down. That's because attention and whether the ad worked or not is a big nuance. You need to make sure that the time you have is used well. So you can have attention time, but if you don't use that attention time to lock it into the brand, to try and build an asset or refresh an asset, it means that time is wasted. There's a time there's a thing in Australia that we do a lot. I don't really know why creative agencies do it, but they have, let's say, a 30-second ad, a 60-second ad, and they do the reveal right at the end. People don't pay attention to ads that way. They pay attention to ads in a switching manner. So it means that they may watch the first 20%, but there's a chance they don't watch the last 20%. And there's a chance that people who didn't watch the first 20% do watch the last 20%. It's a trading game. You have to understand that you're day trading attention to try and understand how an ad will work. And I know that's from Gary Vee, and I hate it.
Great responses. I really like the insights and analytics view that you took, Steve. I think what I wanted to do, and I love this question coming up, I might throw to you, Karen, first. Who do you think are the players in the ecosystem that will need attention to stay in the game?
Look, I think that, look, to some extent, everyone who's involved needs it. So advertisers need people to watch their ads and see them and for that to actually work. So, but in saying that, is it going to be something that's going to keep them up at night? Oh, well, I would say no. But I think for publishers, it's really critical. So we've got media fragmentation, it's no secret. Everyone is aware of that. We've got media inflation and deflationary audiences. There are a lot of questions being asked. They are every year, every time there's a negotiation. Why should I pay more for less? This doesn't make sense to me. So if I'm a publisher, I'm going to be really interested in how I manage my yield and extraction of the inventory that I have at hand, because that's what I've got to sell. And I'm going to talk to those stories that create that. So I absolutely, in that situation, I would be doing that. I think that you'll have other players that'll sit around there, like technology businesses, that will actually come into play and actually say, I can do this real time and quickly, and you can make better choices through the platforms. And if we got to a standardised way of doing that, where it wouldn't be one from one publisher and a different from another, and there were lots of different approaches, then I think there's some real value in that for making choices in real time. But outside of that, and I think, look, from an agency's point of view, they want to make better choices. They want their clients' brands to grow. So, agencies are going to want to make smart, informed decisions around it. But my challenge with it is it going to end up with 15 people doing it in 15 different ways, and one's using neuroscience, and somebody else is using time spent, and someone else is using sound on or off as their way of deriving the attention overlay or whatever it may be. And it's really, really complex. If the industry doesn't come together to provide a simple solution, I think we're just back in that thing where we're talking to ourselves again, as opposed to being really focused on the outcomes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you also mentioned in the past too, it could be quite valuable or probably already is for creative agencies as well. Yeah, I think when we're talking about variants and so forth.
I think the creative agency thing's a really interesting one, because I do work with creative agencies and through clients quite a bit, and now have had that conversation around not saving the big reveal to the end, and how do you bring in either sonic, other attributes so that people can recognise the brands earlier, because we're working with different formats that are, out for small periods of time, that click on, sound on, off, whatever. And I would say that more broadly, the advertising creative model still does build to the big reveal at the end and the big ad and the long format and it needs 60 seconds and I would say never. But all of the stuff that kind of goes into that, and I think there's a real role for creative agency people to be educated on the role that attention can play in different formats, in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Matt, I see you nodding there. Anything you wanted to add?
Oh, no, I agree. Like, the creative agencies we've shown, so we do second-by-second level attention where we show how an ad works over time. And once we show a creative agency, it sort of kind of blows their mind when they can't unsee that type of data. And the way we work with creative agencies is we think that attention is the base layer of how an ad works. An ad can't work without attention in either auditory form or visual form. So you need attention to be able to work at all. And we know that the players that are going to kind of use attention more often than not are going to be the creative agencies. They are going to be, all the media agencies that we work with, probably the larger ones. But everyone who has a long purchase cycle. So I came from insurance. Insurance is the classic example of the ad has an effect on 1% of the market where you're actually influencing 99% of the market, because the 99% are not going to be in market now, they're going to be in market in the future. So it's about demand creation. There are tons of other categories where this occurs. Automotive, FMCG, even though there are tons of light buyers that you can't directly attribute it to a sale. I think the closer you get to the sales funnel, as in the closer you get to a direct sale, that's where you don't really need attention. So if you can directly attribute a sale using like generally paid search as a good measure, you don't really need attention in that area. We do work with some advertisers with trying to help them push where to put their shopper dollar, but that's a totally different discussion with an agency approaches to a brand trying to get more money out of paid search.
Yeah, interesting.
Do you mind if I add something to
Please
that
do.
too? So I think so we've definitely been focused predominantly on brand advertising with attention measurement. Like it's sort of where our focus has been. But that's not to say that we haven't seen utility for it in performance. So everyone here knows that depending, of course, on the price point and what you're trying to sell, getting those conversion signals to optimise performance can take some time. And what we see is that you can use the kinds of attention optimization techniques we focus on to get sort of earlier signals that you can potentially get increased performance in your performance campaigns. And Jake, who's in the audience over there, has got some great war stories of people just sort of saying, we thought you were just going to be vaporware, but this is great. It actually optimizes the things we care about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think what we'll do is we'll take a forward view now and look into the future. And I might start with you, Steve. I'm going to throw this humdinger to you. What measurement might ad attention measurement replace, or how will it complement?
What?
So, rephrase the question.
What is attention going to replace?
Correct. Or how is it going to complement? I'm giving you a bit of an out here.
Oh, how's it going to complement? Oh, well.
Or replace.
Shit. Right. Did I just swear?
It's too late.
You can use one pass if you want. You can pass to your left.
Fuck it. Well, I think it's already complementing it. Whether it becomes an official currency or not, well, I don't believe that it will. But I think all of these new investigations into understanding how media performs or creative performs ultimately is a way of trying to understand how advertising affects business and sales outcomes, business and brand outcomes. If ultimately it can get us to a point where advertising runs and we can see the dollars ticking up against the brand or service that's being advertised, I mean, that's ultimately why we're all in this business. We're trying to get an outcome for our clients. It's just not that easy because there's so many contributing factors to explain the variances between advertising and sales. So will it replace, what will it replace? I think the fundamental metric, regardless of what you call it, is a count of is account. I was going to say something then, but that would just lead us down another rabbit hole. Is account that ultimately is driven by the dollar reward at the end. So, you know, we've got to move the tills. So it's always going to be an adjunct. And I, you know, having 15 years ago gone through this same scenario with the term engagement, I think the quest will always continue to find inventory that generates the best business and brand outcome.
Great. I might throw it over to you, John or Matt. Is there anything that you wanted to add to this in terms of, do you think it can complement additional or existing metrics, or do you think it could potentially replace things in the future? We're talking future focused here.
Complement's easy, replacing is hard. If I had to make a bet right now, if you put a gun to my head and maybe choose, it'll replace viewability. It will probably replace any view-through rates that you use. It will probably replace any cost per completed view that you use, and there's a chance it will replace impressions. So you think that, you know, on a media plan, I completely agree that a CMO should not see impressions on a media plan. But if you see, if you look at impressions as just ads served, that doesn't give you a contextual view of what your media plan is trying to do. Reach metrics always will stay, and it will complement them really well. The way we look at it for reach is we do active attention per reach point. We do them as active attention per impression because they're trade-off measures between scenario planning. But if I had to guess, those are the ones I'd choose.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, so viewability, I mean, arguably it's going to sort of push viewability into the back till it's just sort of something that everyone just has to do. I think what will be unusual about attention in that position is that it has the opportunity to be more of a kind of a personalised metric for the brand. So what I mean by that is, you know, viewability is something that's kind of obvious and everyone knows what it means for every single ad. Whereas attention, we start to get more into what we're trying to achieve with that ad. So to the point that Matt was making before, the amount of attention you need probably depends on where you are in market and the kind of thing that you're trying to sell. So it may be more of a personalised metric. So you won't take it off the shelf. Maybe you use mean attention on this particular media. Maybe you use the proportion of impressions in that media that gets above 1 second of attention or above 2 seconds of attention. So I think it'll be a more customised metric that's more sort of focused on what you're trying to achieve as a brand.
Okay. Yeah, interesting points of view. I might do another future question because I do like these ones, and I'll throw to you first, Karen, and then probably to John or Matt too. So, in terms of when you think about ad intention, how do you think it'll play out in the increased focus on efficiency, sustainability, and reducing the industry's carbon footprint? We heard from June and the folks this morning talking about decarbonisation. It's obviously at the forefront of everyone's mind, including CEOs. Yep. Do you see there being any correlation, Karen? Is it anything that you think that attention and this type of decarbonisation are aligned?
So, look, I think that it's no secret that in boardrooms around the country, and we've got a large practice in ESG, how important the plans are around reducing carbon footprint. But do I see a correlation between that and attention? Not so much. I mean, what we're seeing is a lot of questions being asked by procurement, so clients from a procurement context around, people you partner with. So I expect that will come into play for agencies through the supply chain. I'm already seeing it in some of the tenders that are coming through now, and I'm sure that some of you are having the same experience, where it's like, what's your approach to certain strategies in relation to ESG more broadly, not just on carbon footprint. But does that, if we then went into a client, and again I go back to how I feel it would be received in a boardroom context, and then said, we've now got, so the new metric is attention scores, and we're putting a carbon footprint overlay, so we'll only be working with people that do whatever else. Again, I would say I'm not imagining that would go down particularly well with the people that I have conversations with. Sure. So it goes to that, this industry, our role in providing services to our clients and media inventory to our clients is to help them, sell more and move more products, and they want a responsible supply chain, and I think that's critical to doing that. But if we use it to link to a metric when we haven't established that metric, where there's no standard approach to that, then I'd kind of go, we're going back into this territory which impacts on our credibility, and I think that's not great for everybody.
Sure. I suppose in response to sort of Karen's thoughts there, John, are you seeing anything on your side with regards to what the time or investment that you're taking with regards to decarbonisation? Any sort of projects that you're working on that you can share?
Yeah, so we've only done sort of preliminary work in this space. We were worried about it, as everyone would be, and we were pleased to see that basically there's no apparent correlation between attention time and sort of the carbon footprint, which is good for us for multiple reasons. It means that we can help people optimise for attention. Well, first, help them establish that attention is correlated with the outcomes they care about, and then optimise it, but know at the same time that they're not going to have sort of the rug pulled out from under them as soon as they start to sort of decarbonise. But it also means that one of the potential strategies for decarbonisation is the more you're able to optimise attention, so you be more focused in the media you purchase, is a way to get the same outcomes and reduce your carbon footprint as well.
Great. I've got one more question and then we'll probably open up to JJ, if that's all right. And I love this question. This one I wanted to wrap up with was, if we had a roadmap to get there in terms of into the future, in terms of what we see that attention to become, what would the steps be? I'll pass over to you, Steve, in terms of what you think we need to do to get there.
Well, if we want to, the first step would be to standardise. Second step would be to prove, in inverted commas, but certainly make a solid connection between the attention score and the outcome, the business outcome. And then I think once we've done that across all sectors and all verticals, all platforms, all screens, all demographics.
And they're growing.
All ecosystems, then I think you could potentially take the next step in considering it in some shape or form as being usable in a trading sense.
Sure. What are your thoughts, Matt?
Very, very similar to Steve. Agree on the same measures that we use. The market will determine what it is. It'll shrink the market into place, and then everyone will use a similar method, similar to how viewability works now. We have to scale to every format that's applicable. I think in Amplified Intelligence, we're probably only 2 or 3 formats away. General Web's hard, but there's a few other formats in that area. And if I were thinking about the end game of attention, it's going to be about, how much attention do you need to buy to move the needle in the direction you want? And both from a publisher point of view and an agency point of view. So I mean that the agency is going to understand, have a pretty good idea about how many ads are required on a page to, for the publisher to generate the most amount of income, but for the advertiser to ensure that there's not too much clutter on the page, that they can that a user can see the ad and that ad can have its intended effect. That's a very long-winded approach because it's a tension between, earning money and selling spots, but I think that's where we'll probably end up.
That's great. And John, anything that you wanted to add to this visionary roadmap?
So I think the super long-range vision is that Elon Musk will have Neuralink stuck in all of our brains and they'll measure exactly everything we pay attention to. So it's sort of mic drop at that point.
Love it. And Kaz, do you have anything to add on your side? Because obviously you're dealing with a whole bunch of different challenges being directed with the brands.
Look, I think that for me, I mean, I'm probably aligned to Steve, but if you're going to standardise metrics, understanding reach and performance, and then directly correlating it to client outcomes, I think if you get to that pathway, but if I flip it, I think the biggest obstacle is that as a sector, we're not great at working together. So publishers don't work together. Everyone's building their own, direct buying platforms. There's an array of different things that are going on. We've got, walled gardens and all the stuff that are playing on that make it really, really difficult. I'm just not sure that the future is going to end up with an outcome where that's going to be, standardised in a way that clients would find it palatable. I think that's a real challenge.
Yeah. So we've got a fair way to come.
There's a long way to go, yeah.
Long way to go. I'll pass over to JJ. I know we've probably got a few minutes. Any questions from the...
Actually, how you answered a number of the questions that are coming through. There are some key, there are some common categories. So, but one is around eye tracking. Might be one for John or Matthew. The incorporation of that in the hard yards of science there. How does that work? How does it enrich the process?
If you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm not John or Matt.
Sorry.
I mean, this Think TV's gone back to 2016 with the original testing from Karen Nelson Field, but it's really important across all the various suppliers that you take into account, frame per second that are captured. So various softwares do it at different levels of granularity. So whether it's at 26 frames a second, or whether you've got an on-camera device that some particular suppliers use that don't capture it at that same level of granularity. When you're then applying that count, that attention count, that eyeball count, you're going to come up with a different score. Pure mathematics will tell you that. And so if we're in the process of needing to standardise, yes, it's simple to say, it's eye tracking, it's eyes on screen, eyes on ad, but the technology itself plays a role. So frames per second, we're getting super into the weed. I think we're right down in the dirt with that one, but given we're at a measurement conference, I thought I'd mention it.
So by that, do you mean ACR? Concept recognition?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, various technologies will capture imagery at certain amounts of frames per second, and if your technology is good enough to capture eyes on screen at 1/26th of a second, then you're going to get a different mathematical outcome in terms of whether attention has been paid compared to a piece of technology that's not measuring it at that level.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We use the same method across all of the collections that we do. A really important factor for how eye tracking works is that, one, it's privacy safe, so it's opt-in, but two, that it's also natural. So when we do a collection, we don't tell people what we're recruiting them for. We tell them we're recruiting them for the experience of the platforms that they're on. And we don't let them know that they're actually watching them for the advertising. And the camera's only on for when the advertising's actually on. And we know that the patterns that John was talking about, Steve was talking about, is we're in 12 countries now. We're in every platform you can think of, and if there's bias in these platforms that are unexplainable, that's when there's unnatural collection methods, and we haven't run into that yet. Everything that we've looked at is explainable for every input that we have. We do version control, but we want to make sure that every collection that we do is completely natural in how people use the platforms. So with ours, I encourage you to look up the method. The IB paper explains it perfectly. Just look it up.
Yeah, so I mean, it's true that there's a lot of variation in eye tracking technologies, and that's going to be one of the impediments to standardisation, is that just all of that variation. But there are things that a process of standardisation can check that can sort of compensate for some of that variation. So one of the things is that error. Not all error is equal, so some errors can be biased. So just checking that, being realistic and knowing that there'll be some residual error in any system, but having those checks to say that it's centered around zero, which is particularly important in aggregate measurements on media. You want to know that the error is unbiased so that you get very, very solid sort of estimates of mean attention across different slices of media you want to look at.
Then the other one is kind of two questions in one, really, was in relation to, are we going to be able to learn from some of the mistakes and pain? And there were little workarounds and hacks that happen with viewability. Are we actually going to learn from that? And weaved into that, are you seeing anything in any other countries? I know, like, Matt, we connected with the company that's helping Group N in Sweden in particular. Is there anything that we can learn from pockets of the market globally from that and the pain and the viewability experience?
Viewability for sure. Yeah. So the reason why we're not ready to call attention a currency is because we don't want to happen to what CPMs and viewability did, as in people go for the cheapest CPM or the cheapest viewability they can get. We know that attention differs by every format and every channel that you choose to go across, but it also changes in every context that you go for as well. And we want to make sure that you're paying, when you're paying for attention that we think about attention as a qualitative measure of quality. A quantitative measure of quality, where there are premiums to be attached to, but I don't believe if you just choose the lowest level of attention with a CPM measure that it's going to get the effectiveness that you want. That's why we're very conscious about attention not being a trading option at the moment, or not being a currency, because it's just not there yet.
Are we done?
So a lot of
Great.
questions here. We'll probably have to try and work on them retrospectively afterwards, because there's some good stuff in there. Thank you. That's it from Slido.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking the panellists on the stage, Karen, John, Matt and Steve. Thank you.